Senator Thompson-Rader, Senator Trent.
We have a quorum. Oh, he's here. First thing we're going to do this morning, when I get more members, we'll go into executive session. We're going to vote one bill out, Senator Beans. But for now, we'll start the hearing on Senate Bill 275 and Senate Bill 300. They're very similar, so I'm going to have both senators come forward and present your case, and then the folks that testify, we can kind of group that together too. I think the biggest difference is Senator Trent includes the local tax and Senator Hoskins does not. So senators, proceed when you're ready. And you guys just interrupt each other as you see need to, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Curtis Trent, representing Senate District 20. Senate Bill 275 before the committee would exempt any materials used in the generation or transmission of electricity from state and local sales tax. This would save taxpayers or ratepayers around $20 million per year. So this is a change that would touch on every ratepayer. As you know from my other legislative items that I've pushed this year, I don't believe that government should operate by taxing the basic necessities of life. And I think everyone can agree that electricity has become such a necessity. Our economic advantage as a state has long included a low-cost energy profile relative to other states around us and to the rest of the country. If we want to continue to attract industry and high-paying jobs to our state, we must maintain this advantage, and I believe this bill will help do that. And then thirdly, and I believe there's some information that was passed out to the committee, but in the old case of Southwestern Bell v. Director of Revenue, a principle was set forth that I think makes the production of electricity and the transmission of electricity part of the production of electricity and therefore part of the manufacturing process. This could potentially expose the state to 10 years of reimbursements for sales tax and costly litigation should utilities ever seek to reclaim this lost revenue over the last 10 years, which is the statute of limitations. This measure would short-circuit that process, I believe, and would limit any loss to municipalities and the state for reimbursements to just prospectively. I don't believe that litigation would ensue if this measure were passed. I think any lost revenue to the state would only be going forward from this point rather than be backward looking, which I think is a possibility if the General Assembly fails to act for a more prolonged period of time. I believe we've got some witnesses that can testify further to some of the history. It goes all the way back to Senate Bill 584, which was passed in 2014 and then vetoed by then Governor Nixon, and so I'll leave it to the witnesses to delve into some of that history that predates my time in the General Assembly. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Senator Hoskins, would you like to add anything to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, State Senator Denny Hoskins, representing the 21st Senatorial District, here today to present Senate Bill 300. My bill is identical to Senator Trent's, except mine is just the state sales tax, not the local sales tax, and his includes both. Thank you.
I have one question. This litigation possibility for past taxes, this bill does not remove that threat. It just makes it 1 year at a time, it backs away.
It doesn't remove it, but my understanding is that the parties involved are all reluctant to engage in that kind of litigation if the problem gets solved. If the problem doesn't get solved, and you know the problem hasn't been solved for a significant period of time at this point, and I think at some point in the indefinite future, if this problem continues to linger, the parties might become more interested in looking to the courts for vindication on this. But I believe that if we fix the problem, that would be very unlikely.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the Senator Rader?
I have a question. Thank you. Okay, so just so I'm following this tax removal, tax exemption, so it's it's an exemption on the utilities for the ratepayers, but then it's also an exemption on equipment and materials used to generate or transmit. So like, then the company would also be getting tax exempt on the things that they purchase as materials or.
So the way I understand it, right now the utilities are paying sales tax on these materials for a kind of a catch-all word that is used in the transmission and generation of electricity.
Which doesn't go to, which is not the ratepayer, so that
Well,
would
it
be
goes to the ratepayers insofar as that's an expense that then they bring before the PSC as a part of their expenses to be recouped in rates. And so if we take that expense out, then that will no longer be part of the case that they can present for their establishment of their rates. And so the savings from this will accrue to the ratepayers. The utility companies are essentially a pass-through entity in this case. Like any expense that they incur for the generation of electricity ultimately ends up in the ratepayer's cost. So if we
But
back that expense out, it will back it out for the ratepayer.
But immediately it would, there's a tax on utilities on the bills themselves that the ratepayer pays? Or not?
There may be a sales tax on the actual sale of electricity. I'd have to check on that, and I think I have a witness here that could probably speak to that in more detail.
Okay.
But this is really contemplating the material that's used in the transmission and generation, not the end sale itself.
Mr. Chair.
It's got exemption for utilities, comma, equipment, comma, and materials used for generation.
Could you point me to the line that you're looking at?
It's in the summary. Electrical, let's see. Chapter local sales tax as defined, electrical energy and gas.
Right. So the materials that are enumerated in the bill: electrical energy and gas, whether natural, artificial, or propane; water, coal, and energy sources; chemicals, machinery, equipment, parts, and materials used or consumed in connection with or to facilitate the generation, transmission, distribution, sale, or furnishing of electricity, and so on.
So this is only for the items that go into the rate case.
Yes, so that's the intent. So like if you buy a transformer right now, and your utility company, you purchase a transformer, you would pay a sales tax on that, and a wire, wood
Gotcha.
for your poles, whatever it is, you're paying sales tax on those items. This would eliminate that sales tax, eliminate the associated expense to the utility, which would then go into their cost of transmission and production, which would then go into what their rates actually are. So
Got it.
I believe it would be a direct pass-through savings to the ratepayer.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr.
Senator
Chair.
Hoskins, do you want to add anything to that? Okay. Any other questions? Senator May?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
So when we say material, how broad is that? So that means that I know you're talking about all the things that generate electricity, the equipment and all of that, but isn't that going to be like everything else in the company too? Like, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's intended to be as broad as possible. I mean, if you're buying a truck to service, your transmission
I'm not talking about
lines,
just a
your-
truck. I'm talking about paper,
Paper.
pens, ink pens, are we giving them tax exempt status on everything?
I mean, I think you can maybe make a case. I mean, I think it's more tenuous at that point because, but I mean, I think even if you include those things, that all still goes to the cost of generating the electricity. That all is still ultimately cost that's borne out by the ratepayer.
And so is So how many times? Okay, so when they're presented, when these cases are presented to the PSC for expenses, have we seen what those itemized expenses are
I don't have examples of that
in
with me.
generating the electricity? What are those itemized expenses normally presented to the PSC? Do we want to make sure that we are in line with what the PSC considers expenses for creating electricity, or are we going beyond that scope?
I don't have an example of that with me.
I think one of our witnesses that comes up that has maybe experience presenting expenses to the PSC board would be able to answer that question.
Very good.
Member Gray?
Thanks. Building on what my other two colleagues are asking, I think it would be really helpful to the committee to understand in fairly good detail how something like this proceeds from the purchase all the way through to what it looks like for our constituents on their bills. Because I'm hearing some conflicting information about where taxes come in, and that's sometimes after they're figuring out the return. So I think that's some of the clarity we're looking for. Thanks.
Thank you.
Senator Mosby.
May have answered this already, but how does this affect the customer?
Well, it should result in about a $20 million per year savings to the customer.
And you can guarantee this, or just something that you came up with? Or?
Well, I don't know there are any guarantees in life, but I think we have pretty reasonable certitude in this case that is the expense that we expect to be backed out of the cost to ratepayers.
So this bill should lower the rates of customers? is
It
what
should,
you're saying?
yes.
But that's not a guarantee either?
Well, nothing in life is sure, but as reasonably certain as we can be, yes. I mean, ultimately, it'll be up to the PSC to evaluate this as part of the rates that they allow utilities to charge.
Okay. Is there a chance that it would increase the rates of customers?
I struggle to see how there could be any increase.
Thank you. See no more questions? Thank you, Senators. If you guys want to step aside so the witnesses can come up, we're going to go for those in favor, and please be sure you have a witness form filled out. And everybody had a handout that Ray provided. I think Michelle gave it to everybody, so you've got it now. So go ahead, Ray, when you're ready.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ray McCarty, President of Associated Industries in Missouri, and I hope I can answer your questions on this issue. As you heard, this is something that had actually passed in Senate Bill 584 in 2014, but Senate Bill 584 was vetoed, like many bills, by Governor Nixon. He had the record, I think, for the number of vetoes that issued by a governor. And this one had quite a few, Senate Bill 584 had quite a few items in it. So this was not the only item that the governor was considering when you looked at that bill. So you could kind of understand why there was no motion made to override his veto on this bill. But at the time, what had happened is you had the Utilicorp United case, which came first, and that said that generation was exempt from tax. So everything a utility company buys today to generate electricity is exempt from sales and use taxes. That's settled there, and it's not included in this bill. It's also not included in the cost of this bill. What Utilicorp United did say, though, is that transmission and distribution functions were after the manufacturing process had ended, and so that would be taxable. And so as a result, ratepayers started paying taxes based on transmission and distribution equipment that was bought. You're talking things like transformers and wires, and that's all rolled into the rates, and a couple of senators have asked how that goes into rates. The way it works is they pay the tax up front on the item, and then the item with the tax included is presented as one of the items when they go for a rate case with the PSC. The PSC looks at that and allows those costs. And so to guarantee it, you can't guarantee anything, but if that cost is not there to be requested in the first place, then you're pretty sure it's not going to ever be in the rates. And that's how ratepayers will save. We represent, of course, industrial ratepayers, but this impacts everyone. This impacts all of your moms and pops, your small businesses, your individual residential people that are purchasing electricity. This is another cost that's added in right now when you're figuring the utility bills of a single parent. And you asked about whether the sale of utilities to customers is exempt or not. Actually, the state exempted the sale of residential utilities, so utilities to a residential customer are exempt from state tax, but we did allow at that time, it's a long time ago, allow local governments to reimpose the tax if they wanted to on residential sales, and some have done that. Some cities have elected to do that on their customers, and so they're actually getting, if there is any tax on it on your bill, it's a local tax that's being levied right now by local governments and not the state on residential utilities. Commercial utilities pay full tax on everything. So after the Utilicorp United case, the following year, Southwestern Bell brought a case against the state for what we believe is a very similar process, and that's the handout that I provided to you. In Southwestern Bell, what they said is that when you speak into a telephone, there's a copy made of your voice. That copy is then transmitted over wires and wireless technology, and then on the other end, a person that receives the call then decodes, the receiver decodes that copy so you can hear it, and then you speak, and it makes another copy and goes through the whole chain again. The key that the Supreme Court keyed in on, I believe, when I read the cases, is that there was something happening to that all the way through. There's something happening to that signal all the way through, so that the end product wasn't realized until you received the copy of the voice on your phone. Utilities work the same way. If you think about it, you can't go in and just plug into the line that comes out of the power plant. You would have a very bad experience doing that, and it wouldn't be usable to you. The taxable experience is when you can actually turn on your TV set and you receive that electricity in a usable form at your place of business or your home. And so we believe that everything, after Southwestern Bell, we believe that everything that's involved in getting that electricity to you in a usable form should be exempt from sales and use taxes also. And that's where this threat of lawsuit comes in. Actually, we believe that that was the case since Southwestern Bell 2 was finally decided in 2005. And so we believe that we do have the ability to go back. 10 years is the limit on these types of refund claims. But we do believe we could go back and make a refund claim for 10 years worth of this sales and use taxes, because we think the court spoke in Southwestern Bell and was very clear about the fact that everything used to get that signal to the end consumer was exempt. We believe the same thing would be true with utilities, with electric utilities. A couple of notes on the fiscal note. You'll see a range on the fiscal note. There's a low end of the range, around 6.6 something, I think, for state general revenue. And I would encourage you to look at the low ends of the range on that, because if you read the fiscal note in detail, what Oversight did, Oversight always puts out multiple requests when they're trying to calculate a fiscal note to multiple sources. One of them was Department of Revenue. The other was OA Budget and Planning. And if you look at the response that came from the Department of Revenue, we generally agree with how they got to their number, because they were using taxable sales data, actual data that they had in the database at the Department of Revenue for taxes that are collected today. They used that as the basis for their estimate. OA Budget and Planning went out and used a federal number, input-output tables, which are good if you have no other way of estimating something. But then they say, well, this is $1.1 billion in taxable sales, and it's probably 25% of it. We don't really know. So we don't think it's a reliable number, but this number is there, and they put that in as a high range. And I don't know how you feel about it, but if I were the one that was looking at this, I would want something concrete or nothing at all, and I think they should have put unknown on the upper end of that if they wanted to have an upper end at all. But I think when the agency that collects taxes can tell you how much something costs, you should go with that. And if you look in the fiscal note, the part the Department of Revenue gave is shown as the minimum part of the range on that fiscal note. Finally, the difference between the two bills, Senate Bill 275 is a full exemption from sales and use taxes at the state and local level. Senate Bill 300 only provides that exemption at the state level. And let me explain why I think it's important to do the full exemption. When you passed the Wayfair bill, Senate Bill 153 in 2021, we straightened up the manufacturing exemption. And previous versions of this bill have always been modeled after the manufacturing exemption, because remember, what we're saying is manufacturing that electricity in a usable form to the customer is the manufacturing event. And so we want to make sure that that these electricity sales or purchases to provide electricity are treated the same way as every other manufacturing input. And that manufacturing input used to be a state-only exemption. When you passed the Wayfair bill, you included state and local. And so we think in order to be congruent, that it should be state and local for this as well, because what we're saying is we're manufacturing a product. And if we were to pursue the refund claim method, that would be what we would be arguing, is we are manufacturing a product. It is a taxable product even, at least to commercial users. And it is, and in most cases, I think a lot of these cities have reimposed that tax on residential customers as well. So if you have questions, I want to answer your questions. I hope I answered some of the ones that were asked before I got up here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks, Ray. Well, I'm just curious, since all this is passed through and they get reimbursed for the taxes they pay, it seems one of the motivations is saying, we better pass this or they're going to sue. Why would they sue? It's not coming out of their profits anyway. It's just passed on to consumers.
Right. It's passed on to consumers, and that's another reason why we probably haven't seen a refund claim go to court, because they don't want to incur the legal fees and all of the costs that would go along with that. But we do believe that it's good law after Southwestern Bell, and in fact, you all reaffirmed the Southwestern Bell cases in recent legislation. So we believe after that, for sure, the Supreme Court would look at this differently than they did before Southwestern Bell. And we just don't really want to go through the hassle of doing that. And, you know, also, I mean, utility companies are companies like every other company. If we can address it and go forward, they would rather do that, save the hassle of going to court, and also save the expense for ratepayers.
I think it's interesting. I would love to see a court ruling on whether converting a voice to an analog signal to a digital signal is the same as a step-down transformer. But that's something we'll probably never figure out if we pass this. Questions for this witness?
Yes.
Senator May.
So, I know you probably wouldn't know this, but just hypothetically, do you know what the local impact is? Like, you know, do you know what the local revenue that's being collected at the local level?
Yes, we do, Senator, and it's in your fiscal note. It's at the low end of the range. It's around $9.6 million, so right around $10 million in combined city and county impact.
Okay, and so it's 9.6. So that means all of the locals total would lose that revenue.
Correct.
Oh yeah, they're going to be crying.
That could be.
So do municipal electric companies pay this tax, or are they exempt?
Thank you, Senator. No, they do not. So municipal utilities are already able to enjoy this exemption. They are already able to buy everything that it takes to get the electricity to their consumers tax-free,
So
because they're
co-ops,
municipal government.
this applies to co-ops and IOUs then?
It does. It applies to co-ops as well as in IOUs,
Okay.
investor-owned
Thank you.
utilities.
Questions? Thank you, Ray. How many people want to testify in favor of this bill? How many opposed? Okay. Does anybody in a hurry, do we have time to do executive session last, or does any senator need to leave? Okay. Let's hang on just a second. We're going to go into executive session real quick and deal with the bill we want to vote out. Senator Bean, are you ready to explain? Okay. So I move that we go into executive session. Do I have a second? Seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are now in executive session. I move that we bring Senate Bill 266 before the committee. Do I have a second?
Second.
Senator Bean seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The Senate Bill 266 is before the committee. Senate Bill 266 was a bill we heard a few weeks ago on water basins, and some changes on that. It's sponsored by Senator Bean. He has a sub.
Yes, I have a sub that ends in .03C. We worked with Senator McCreary on this to exempt the language of unless exempted by the commission. So that's all that the changes are in .3C. We also had a sub ending in .02C, which changed the title from water pollution to earth and basin. We added non-toxic and non-metallic, and then we fixed a typo also in there. So Like I say, appreciate Senator McCreary bringing this to our office, and that's what we included into the sub.
Any discussion on the Senate Bill 266 or the sub? Seeing none, I move that we adopt Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 266. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have adopted the sub. I move that we, any more discussion on the bill or the sub? Okay. I move that, I'm sorry. Senator May?
Question. So we're exempting construction companies from this, right?
Limestone quarries, specifically limestone quarries.
Okay.
They were caught up in unintended consequences in House Bill 92 back in 2015, and this is exempting limestone quarries only,
Okay.
just
Okay, very
limestone
good.
quarries.
Very good.
I move that we do pass Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 266. Do I have a second? Senator Bean seconded. Please, any more discussion? Seeing none. Michelle, please call the vote.
Senator Searpoint.
Aye.
Senator Fitzwater. Senator Bean. Senator Bernstetter. Senator Brown. Senator Esslinger. Senator May. Senator McCreary. Senator Mosley. Senator Thompson Raider. Senator Trent.
By a vote of 9-0, we have voted to do pass Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 266. I now move we leave executive session. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are out of executive session. Sorry about that interruption. Please, the next person that would like to speak on Senate Bill 275 or 300, please come forward.
Chairman, members of the committee, Zach Monroe with Ameren, Missouri, here to testify in favor of both Senate Bill 275 and Senate Bill 300. This issue came to our attention as something that we thought would be ideal to address this year based off of some legislation that passed last year. As Mr. McCarty had talked about, that this is something that's been around since 2014 and has been filed since then but never gained traction for one reason or another. In Senate Bill 745 last year, this same issue was addressed to clarify solar generation. There had been a variety of tax filings from DOR as far as to say what is eligible, what is not eligible for it, and that was the emphasis for the language last year on solar generation. For example, the ruling that we had seen was that when building a solar generation field, only the panels and the stands were sales tax exempt. All other equipment involved in that project was not, because it was not involved in the actual generation of the power. But the rest of the equipment there was very much necessary for the generation of that power and to put it out on the system at hand. Collector lines, the actual transformers there, etc. And so last year in Senate Bill 745, that was all clarified to say anything within that system to make it function was covered as sales tax exempt. So it got us talking about bringing that clarification to all generation types, and then also from the examples Mr. Carney said about the actual getting it to the customer. We charge, by law, we charge sales tax on all commercial accounts depending on their business. Some manufacturing has their exemptions in there, others do not. There is an exemption for sales tax for residential from state sales tax, but there is not for local. We, in fact, charge sales tax on 286 different municipalities in our service territory, ranging from 0.5% to 4%, depending on the municipality. So there is an essence of double taxation. If we're paying taxes on the materials necessary to get that product to the customer, and then they're also being charged the sales tax for the product they receive, that is the motivation for the legislation and why we support it. I'm happy to take any questions.
Do you know, in the last, whatever the most current year that you keep track, how much Ameren spent on
Yeah,
equipment
I
that was?
asked our tax department that, and they said over the past several years, depending on the construction that we undertake, it's ranged from, we pay $10 to $15 million in sales tax on equipment necessary for transmission and distribution equipment.
Okay. And the Supreme Court ruling that came out last summer, is that just about?
That's property
Is that
tax
just
only.
about property tax only,
Yes,
no
sir.
sales tax touch? Okay, thank you. Questions for this witness? Tracy, go ahead. I'm sorry,
I
Senator
don't want to
McCray.
put you on the spot, but
Sure.
could you walk us through in layperson's understanding of how, like when you buy something and it's taxed, how that gets rolled into a rate case, a rate review?
Sure,
Because I think that's what we're struggling, I feel like we're struggling to understand
right.
how this is going to benefit our constituents.
Sales tax on equipment is rolled into the expense of the project. We take forward to the PSC when we have a rate case, all necessary expenses for, that were prudently incurred to meet the needs of the customer for the system. This is an expense that is rolled in. If it is no longer charged, it will no longer be rolled into those costs, and therefore it will be a reduction in the revenue requirement going forward based on that.
Okay. And then the municipal taxes that show up on people's bills, those are set at the local level then?
Yes, they
So
are.
that's why some cities or counties don't have it, but
Correct.
some do? Okay, very good. Thank you.
Any questions? See none. Thank you very much. Next in favor? Jason, were you there when we failed to override this veto?
I may have had some experience with this in the past. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Jason Zamkus here to testify on behalf of the electric co-ops. Ultimately, all of the expenses incurred in the generation, transmission, and distribution are borne by our member owners. Both of these proposals would provide direct cost savings to them, and for that reason, we'd like to go on record in support.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Zamkus? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next in favor?
Thank you, Senator, members of the committee. Kara Hoover on behalf of Evergy. I think for all the reasons you've heard ahead of me, we would like to go on record in support as well.
Do you know how much Evergy is paid in any calendar year?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask me that. I don't have that exact number, but ours would be slightly lower than Ameren, so they're 10 to 15. I'd say we'd be in the
So if they
7 to
paid-
10 range, if I had to guess.
Of taxes paid?
Yeah,
Okay.
but I
thank
will
you.
get that to you. I'll
Okay,
ask.
thank you.
Thank you.
And Carrie, you had a witness or did, okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Excuse me, Philip Arnson with the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and we'd like to go on record in support.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none. Next in favor?
My name is Ryan DeBoof. I represent the Missouri Solar Energy Industry Association. We want to go on the record in support of the bill.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Oh, boy.
Mr. Chairman, David Winton here on behalf of Liberty Utilities. Want to go on record in support of the legislation.
Is that it? All right,
Yes,
thanks.
sir.
Thank you. Next in favor? First person opposed, please come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Richard Sheets. I'm the Executive Director of the Missouri Municipal League, and we would like to go on record in opposing Senate Bill 275. We're always concerned about erosion of our local municipal sales tax. It's really the most important revenue source that municipalities levy to pay for vital services, our police, fire in particular, but also capital improvements and other activities. So it's really concerning when we erode that sales tax. Our sales tax, doesn't just benefit the residents in homes, it also benefits the business residents and community. And so the services that would be depleted or defunded because of lack of revenue would affect businesses in that community. Also, this distribution sales tax exemption would impact different cities at a different level. For example, in Jefferson City, we have ABB, who manufactures transformers. So Jefferson City would have a greater impact, and another city that doesn't have a facility that generates or manufactures poles or transformers or other materials used in that electrical generation process. So the impact would be varied across the state and would have a significant impact greatly on one municipality versus another. I'll try to answer any questions if I can.
Thank you. Questions for this witness? I have one. Do you know, we passed the internet sales tax a couple of years ago, and I know my cities, it's generating a lot more revenue than they had projected. I'm assuming that's pretty true across the state.
Well, we're having a situation of inflation, so of course, with inflation, we're getting higher sales tax levels, but also the costs for businesses are going up too. So it's kind of levels off.
No, I don't disagree that the inflation is impacting it, but I think the city's been surprised how much stuff is delivered to people's doors. And
well, and we talked about this during Wayfair, because Wayfair wasn't a windfall; it was just recouping those sales that have been lost. So that's we've talked about it a bunch of times.
Okay,
but
thank you.
But yeah. So
okay. Any other questions, Richard? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Next up, in opposition, please come forward and leave your witness form and start when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name's Steve Hobbs. I'm the Executive Director for the Missouri Association of Counties, and I'm here to testify today in opposition to Senate Bill 275, and only Senate Bill 275. And the main reason we're here today is because of the fiscal note that is attached to Senate Bill 275 for the local portion of it. As the gentleman who was here just before spoke about, that erosion of sales tax base is always a struggle for counties. You mentioned that with the advent of Wayfair and online sales tax, that some cities and counties are collecting more money. The stark truth of that is, though, that not all cities and not all counties have been able to pass the local option use tax, and if they don't have that, they're not collecting that. So that is something that it varies. It could be a city has it within the county and the county doesn't have it, or vice versa. So that's one thing on that. In the testimony we heard earlier here today, and we've been working with our members, been working with associated industries to try and understand some of the dynamics of this. And I have presented this to my board, and the question that kept coming back to me is, if the fiscal note on the low end is $18 million for the state and the local governments, and the estimated cost or savings to the consumer is $20 million, that's just a wash. If you take the higher amounts, which has been put under a cloud a little bit, it's more like $98 million on the highest end for both state and local. And our members are struggling with the fact that they're waiting for the first time that a utility company goes and says they want a rate decrease. And so we have a level of mistrust that the consumers will ever see that rate decrease if something like this were to go into effect, notwithstanding the effects it'll have on local government, if we need to work through that.
Thank you, Steve. How many counties collect this, do you know?
I do not know that, sir.
Do you think the majority? I don't know.
I think it varies. It depends. And to be honest with you, that never was my strong suit when I was in county government. Our county clerks work expressively with the utilities, but I can try and get you some numbers for that, Senator, if you would like that.
Because it'd be a countywide tax if it was applied. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Questions for this witness? Seeing none, thanks, Steve.
Thanks, sir.
Next in opposition, please come forward. Anybody here for information purposes? Well, that will conclude the hearing on Senate Bill 275 and 300. All business before the committee being finished, I move that we adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.